Today I'm going to share with you the top 10 most crushing Scandinavian victories. All of these games, bar one, feature players with white rated to 700 plus speed A, losing in 30 moves or less against Scandinavian. It's going to feature some of your favorite chess players, some of your favorite content creators for chess as well. So we're going to have a lot of fun with this. And by the end of this video, you're going to know how to win with black with the Scandinavian defense. Our first game I'm going to show you is between Gashimov against former world champion Vladimir Kramnik from the World Blitz Championship Moscow 2009. One of the nice things about the Scandinavian is that there are a lot of different ways in which you can play it. There's something to suit any kind of style, and you only have to learn one structure, the d4, versus a pawn structure like this. So after knight f3, the approach that most people think of if they don't know a lot about the Scandinavian is they just assume you're going to go c6 and just go for a setup like this and just play it like a system opening. But you can also play the Scandinavian quite creatively, and Kramnik here goes for the move of g6, preparing the kingside fianchetto. And at this point, rather than Geshimov's bishop g5, I think that the move knight b5 is a little bit more critical, and is something that I do cover in my course Play the Strongest Scandinavian in 2025. If you're watching this video on March 12th or before, you can actually get that course at a pretty nice discount, so you can check the link in the description for more on that. For this video, I'm just going to really focus on just showing you how to actually win with the Scandinavian, just showing you the key ideas to get you started, and then you can take the next steps from there as you please. Now, with opposite side castling, the position obviously is pretty dynamic, and I think that black should probably play it quite actively. Bishop g4, just pin the knight, reduce white's options a little bit, is probably the approach I would favor as black. And we don't even mind all that much actually if we do give up the bishop here, because we do get a pretty solid position with the pawns on light squares kind of playing against their bishop. But in the game, Kramnik goes a6. It's a blitz game, you can't expect it to be perfect. Something else I also will be doing in this video is you're not just going to be seeing how to win with the Scandinavian, but you're also actually going to get a chance to try to find the moves for yourself. Because rather than white kind of admitting the mistake of bishop d3 and just retreating back again, even with the loss of the tempo, Gashimov tried to play it more dynamically with knight to e4. And after takes, here's the first puzzle. And you can put these in the comments as well, what move you would play in this position. And if you do need more time to find the move that Kramnik played here as black, then you can pause the video and, figure it out from there. Just make sure not to start the procedure, because then it'll make it harder to learn the most from the video. But these jokes aside, the answer is that it's all about loose pieces drop off. These two pieces, well, a2 is a pawn, but they're both undefended. And so we can go for a sneaky little fork with queen e6 like Kramnik did in the game. Because if white takes that pawn, rook a7, queen b4, we regain the pawn, but we just have a absolute massively powerful attack down that b file. Our attack is clearly a lot faster than white's here, such that they can't even get away with taking e7 because they just run into a big attack anyway. So white goes queen f4 instead, which does have its tactical problems. Like, there's the one point where black probably could have played it a bit better. Because if they play f6 with this bishop h4, g5 fork, they basically just end up winning a piece there. So that's how they probably should have played it, but instead, bishop f3 was played. And even here, black's actually still doing pretty well in this position. Like, white kind of has to go queen a3 and sort of play this pawn down endgame to kind of get even a playable position. And note, by the way, they can't take the pawn because there will be a crisscross pin of the bishops like this. But instead, white played the move bishop takes e7, Gashimov's still trying to attack. But sometimes the best defense, actually a lot of times the best defense is a good counterattack. That's the hint I'm going to give you to see if you can find the move that Kramnik played to win the game here. And the answer is that the move of bishop h6 just wins on the spot. And white resigned here because if you block with the rook, you're going to then run into queen a1 checkmate, and otherwise white is just losing the house. Now, if you're enjoying this video so far and want to see more like it, then do make sure to hit the subscribe button, especially if you're a bit more new to the channel, because we do have a lot more Scandinavian content planned to help you really play this opening at a high level, that all being free on YouTube here. And also, yeah, do like the video. It helps me to know that I should make more like these ones for y'all, by you showing your appreciation. So that was the first game, and because we do have 10 games, I'm going to be taking an approach a bit more rapid fire, where I will be going through the games a little more quickly, of course, than I do, actually a lot more quickly than I do within my course. But at the same time, I do have the annotations as well to the games, which those who do invest in my course, again, link in the description, you are going to get those annotations along with a lot of other features that are talked about in the link to just help you really master Scandinavian and just feel very comfortable with it. Now, our second game is between Kayakin against Dubov. This was a game from the Lindor's Abbey Chess 24 tournament. And yeah, basically, this knight c6 that Dubov played is sort of another creative way to play the queen d6 Scandinavian. Rather than just playing a solid move like c6, knight c6 is a bit more provocative. Where, say, if white were to play a bit of a lazy move such as bishop to e3, for example, well, then we can think about moves such as a6, just kind of covering these squares. And if I continue developing normally, we have moves like bishop f5, and we can put some pressure on d4. There are also some cases where you can play moves like bishop to g4 as well, and just kind of put some pressure on the pawn this way. So that's kind of the setup that black's going for with this knight c6. Um, but in the game, Kayakin does play the critical move of knight b5. But then after queen d8, he doesn't play it in the best way. Now, for your opponents, the move that'll probably be the most obvious then will be the move of bishop f4 to set up the attack on c7. But it turns out we do have a good defense, and as I explained in more detail in my course, I probably should be playing a move like c4 if they want to sort of have some sort of opening advantage. There was a very nice game, actually, that Abdu Satorov beat Carlsen in from this position that I do also cover in the course. Obviously, I don't have time to go through every single game here, but it's just to give you a bit of the outline, a bit of a teaser of what to expect when you do get around to actually like mastering the Scandinavian with black. But the thing with bishop f4 is that knight d5 is now going to be a good reply. After take bishop g3 and a6, white really should just play the move of knight c3 here, and there are various ways you can play it, like e6 is probably the most solid in this position, just to kind of keep the knight on d5, maybe have an annoying pin in some moments. But you can also play moves like bishop g4 or bishop e5 if you do want to play it a little bit more actively by comparison. This is also going to be legitimate. But instead, white played the move knight a3. And this one, I'm going to actually do a little bit of an exception, actually give you kind of two puzzles for this game. Because I think of all the games I'm going to show, this one's actually kind of my favorite. Because how often do you see a 2-7-5-2 FIDE GM be just losing a piece in just 13 moves? Obviously, an opening like in the Nidor for the Berlin, that's never really going to happen realistically. But in a sideline like a Scandinavian, where they have to think on their own early, well, magic like this can happen. So well done, by the way, if you found the move of e5 in this position. Now, technically, you can play bishop g4, and normal development is also going to be okay, but e5 is a move that really punishes white here. Or after takes and bishop b4, already white kind of has to play the move of c3 just to avoid ending up in really hot water. After something like takes, you're just able to kind of get your pawn back, and you just have a position where probably only black is the one who can really hope to be better just because of the weaknesses in white's structure. Still, this is a far lesser evil than what happens in the game, because after knight d2, Dubov reveals his big opening bomb in the move of h5, threatening to trap the bishop with h4. What if white prevents it? Well, white played h4 to avoid that. But there's another idea of h5 as well, which is bishop g4, bringing the bishop in like this. If they try to block with f3, well, now they run into some problems with knight e3 in the mix here. And in the game after bishop e2, this is the other puzzle I want to give you to make sure that you are tactically sharp, that we're not just improving your openings, but we are making you a much stronger chess player as well, because that really is the point at the end of the day of my trainings and my courses to have you winning more games and getting your rating up. So the answer here, and again, pause the video if you do need a bit more time to think about it. I do realize I'm going through games a little bit quickly just because we do have a lot of them to get through in this vid. But the answer here is that we want to play bishop takes a3. And the idea of bishop a3 is that if they take back, we just go knight c3, and with this fork, we do in fact win a cold piece. And the game after bishop g4, bishop b2, well now the rook's under attack, the bishop's under attack. And rook b1 runs in a knight c3, so that's clearly no good for white either. In the game after bishop h5, it sort of turned out that white's basically just a rook down and doesn't really have a whole lot of compensation. I'll just quickly play through the remaining moves just to show you how black won. It's a matter of trading off the pieces, not letting white get any sort of big counterattack. Obviously you don't want to fall for the knight d6 fork in this position, but after king g8, it's all very stable. The rook comes to the defense. We use the pin, and after a few more moves, white just resigned. Like black's just going to be up a piece for pretty much nothing in a position like this. Because if they do play fe4, then yeah, we just take and rook d1, and we pick up the rook and win the game from there. So a very nice game by Dubov. Definitely a really inspirational one. Like it was one of those games that really got me very excited about Scandinavian. And as you might have guessed from my video and my tone, it's still an opening I'm very excited about and really love to this day. The next thing I want to share with you is actually won by the world champion Magnus Carlsen. He was playing this one against Jan Nepomniachtchi in the Tata Steel Blitz in 2019. So a bit of an older game. But this one features the move of c6, and this sort of old mainline approach of playing c6 and just going for this kind of setup is one that I didn't actually cover in my original course that I'd created in 2020. But in the 2025 update, I have actually included coverage of this c6 approach as well. So if you do want to play in a very solid way, kind of in the style of the big Queen D6 expert Sergei Tivyakov, whose games I do cover extensively in the course, that it'll allow you to, just feel very, very comfortable and be able to kind of outplay players, like who are not like grandmasters or not strong grandmasters, in a similar style to what Tivyakov does, by just using the same sort of ideas. Okay, I have to be careful, I guess, not to like overpromise, but you get the idea that if you know the ideas very well, you can outplay your usual opponents. Anyway, in this point, well, I probably should play the move of knight e5 if they do want to try to get some sort of tangible advantage, but it's something that, these ideas we are, going to explore, of course, in the, in my main course, I do dive into it, as it were. But yeah, after bishop c4 instead, if white does play normal moves in the Scandinavian, a bit of a pattern you'll notice is that against normal developing moves, black is just doing quite well for the most part. And kind of the reason for that, like let's say if I just play a few just moves for both sides just to kind of demonstrate the point. You can kind of see that it's a bit hard for white to really leverage their development in a position like this. And a big reason for that is that white just doesn't really have such a great pawn break. They want to play c4, but the knight on c3 is in the way. They can't really go d5 because we're covering it with a million pieces. And once we catch up in development, just our long-term kind of strategic advantage just means we get a very pleasant Caro-Kann where we manage to avoid a whole lot of theory along the way. And I think that for those who are rated below, say, 2,200 or so, that you're going to get this sort of very comfortable middle game in the significant majority of your games based on my own extensive experience playing this opening in over 1,000 online games across the different servers in my lifetime. And also, in some over the board games as well, but mostly online. So after bishop g4, white plays bishop e3, just wanting to make sure that that d4 pawn is protected. And also by playing this way, white is keeping the option of castling long in some moments, where we see this g4 move. It's a little bit more effective, obviously, when you haven't castled short. But knight e5, h4, h5, which is a plan that can sometimes be annoying some other versions, it's just not as scary here, because we're in time to attack their knight, so not going to be able to trap in our bishop. And if they do take on g6, we just kind of recycle the bishop and just have our pawns very nicely complementing our remaining bishop, and also negating their unopposed bishop, meaning that their bishop pair is just not going to be all that effective in a position like this one, and we can kind of just play the normal moves from there. Now, just fast forwarding a bit, I do admit that in an ideal world, I'd like to analyze the game a little more deeply, but keeping in mind, the fact I don't want this to be like a 3-hour video, I will just show you the moves played. I mean, when white plays knight e5 and just sort of bluffs like this and gambits a pawn, like, that's already a sign that white's a bit uncomfortable in the arising middle game. And if it can be uncomfortable for a world championship finalist like Nepomniachtchi, actually a multi-time world championship finalist, then just imagine how hard it's going to be for your opponents. You have h4, you do have h5 to kind of, defend your bishop that way. But in the game, white goes rook f1, trying to get into f5 in this form. And black finds a very nice move. I really like the move that Carlsen played here. It's a critical position where if you just let white get an f5, you are going to come under a very strong attack. But by counter-punching first with b5, it kind of allows us to take control. Where at bishop d3, we can kind of just swap the bishop off, and after bishop b3 instead in the game. Black just kind of did a good job of just keeping things very stable. He's a pawn up, he doesn't have any weaknesses. If white were to play f5, you might have noticed a little bit of a tactical problem that the move bishop h5 does skewer the queen and rook and basically just win material and the game. So white goes h4, trying to get an f5 without running into the bishop to h5 idea. And, Carlsen's move of bishop e4 maybe objectively is not the best. But first, keep in mind that it's a blitz game. And second, even without playing the very best moves, Carlsen still managed to get a pretty good position here. Probably White's best bet in hindsight might just be to play a bit more for long-term compensation with a move such as knight c5. And, definitely the position will be quite sharp from here, let's put it like this. But after g5, Black is just able to keep the control. We can see how all of Black's pieces are just very stable in this kind of structure, making it very easy for us to play. And after h5, let's see if you can find the move that Carlsen played. There's actually several winning moves, but if you want to pause the video and you need some time to figure it out, this is a good chance to do so, as I have some refreshing water. So the answer here is that we can just play knight takes f4. It turns out that Nepo was once again bluffing, and you can just take the pawns and, their attack just doesn't really get anywhere in this position. You just have to be a little bit careful, just make sure they don't get any sort of counterplay. You also could have played h6 if you just want to just have all these pieces just covering your king like it's 4-player chess. But after rook fd8, it turns out bishop e5 is actually not as scary as it looks. It might seem that initially that white is going to be winning a piece with this fork, but we have a nice little counterattack at knight d5, which Carlsen did play in the game, realizing it's only an exchange of bishops here, or in the case of bishop c7, an exchange of the queens. So after queen d4, the game concluded where, Carlsen just did a good job at, just grabbing the material on offer. Nepo was trying to create some swindling chances with the fawn bishop and fawn pawn, but after bishop f6, they just gets traded off, and black's just going to collect the harvest, and therefore, on move 30 here, Nepo just resigned. So this one was the longest game, it's why it took a little bit more time, but you can sort of see how you can really start playing the Scandinavian just by knowing some system opening like this. And yeah, if you're a more advanced player, obviously you'll need a little bit more than that in order to be able to, kind of outplay strong players in the opening, which is where my course, of course, comes in handy. But yeah, this at least will get you started where you can start playing the opening and then, going in deeper into it as you like from there. The next game I want to share between Ivanchuk against Karpov. So something I didn't mention before is actually a lot of these games I'm talking about here are actually ones that I'm sharing just in YouTube, like they're not something just exclusive to the course. But this game between Ivanchuk and Karpov from the Captag Rapid event of 2013, this one is a game I do actually cover in the course. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of share a little bit of a shortened kind of version of it, just to give you a little bit of a teaser, because this kind of Tibiakov move order of c6 and bishop g4 is actually one that I didn't actually know about until I kind of initially prepared the initial course in 2020. But then I kind of was playing it in some games and actually noticed my opponents just weren't really, they were kind of caught by surprise by this move order because they weren't able to play their 95 idea that we saw in the notes of the previous game. And yeah, if white doesn't know exactly what they're doing, you can kind of just get a very comfortable position playing a very similar setup to what we just saw. And it is something I do go into a lot deeper in the actual course, but for now, let's see how the game played out. So Ivanchuk does actually play it very well at first, where he does play h3 and sort of the idea in a way, like you're kind of playing a little bit of a bluff, where you are sort of taking the pawn, and technically, if white plays it correctly, this doesn't end up being really sound, but it's something that, yeah, unless your opponent is prepared, they're probably not going to find the best moves here. And you'll sort of be able to kind of defend your king and sort of get to a playable position as such. But to Ivanchuk's credit, he did find this move of bishop f4, which admittedly is kind of the problem with this variation, where white does have a pretty big advantage. At the same time, the position was kind of messy enough that, or complex enough that Ivanchuk still lost his way, even though the engine does say that the position is winning for white. So after rook d1, queen b6, Bishop c4 is a very nice move to just go for the mate threat. So this is a position where it really should just be completely winning for white. Then, if white plays queen g4, for example, and, keeps the king in the center and stops the knight developing, that's going to be obviously very rough for black. And this is also the reason, by the way, why I kind of added a lot of different ways to play the queen d6 line in the course, because I initially kind of came to the conclusion I wasn't completely satisfied with this as kind of a surprise weapon. So I wanted to give you a bit of variety to, pick a system that you kind of liked. But in the game, if Anshuk does kind of lose his way a little bit, these moves here are certainly okay. But as the game plays on, white kind of starts to lose his way at some point. For example, a move like Rook E1 is, a pretty natural one just to, even kind of threaten Rook E5 and these sort of mating tricks. But in the game, A3 is technically still okay, but again, we kind of see white, maybe not playing it the absolute cleanest way. And, when white does miss the chance here to kind of go B4 and just keep that initiative going here, with something like takes knight D2 and just bring the knight in like this, which would in fact be probably just winning for white with best play. But once they miss that opportunity, well, now black is suddenly doing not all that badly. Like for example, queen c7 is actually pretty decent for black with ideas of, trading off the queens, even if it means giving back the pawn. The rising ending is really not so bad for black here. Kind of reminds me of the Sveshnikov that I used to play as a kid. But in any case, after 96, this was kind of the puzzle that I wanted to share, because in this position, white made a little bit of a mistake, to put it mildly, with the move of c3. And this is what I want to just give you as a quick puzzle. What would be your move for black in this position here? And if you need more time, you can pause the video to figure it out. But the answer is that the move of knight g7 is the clincher. Clearly, Ivanchuk just completely missed this retreat, which does win a full piece. And so he just resigned, and that is how he lost in 20 moves. And this also explains why white should have played the move bishop g4 instead, to avoid this knight g7 and just keep that initiative with equal material, where clearly the white king is a lot safer than its counterpart, which is also amplified by the initiative that the opposite color bishops offer. So it is true that, here I have, quite openly shown one of the issues with one of my past recommendations, which, I mean, I was aware about this when I prepared the initial course, but it's kind of one of these systems that, in Blitz or Rapid against a non-professional, you can probably get away with the gamble. But if you do want something that's objectively a bit stronger, then you can refer within the Queen D6 complex or with some other moves. Well, that's where I do cover like a lot of different ways to play the opening in Play the Strongest Scandinavian. And the nice thing is that whatever your style is, whether it's more tactical, positional, strategic, dynamic, whatever it may be, there's really something for everyone in the Scandinavian, and you can really start playing it relatively quickly. As we've already kind of seen with some of the examples here, that the ideas are not that hard to remember and to understand as black. Now, in this next game between Anand against Mamedyarov, you're actually going to get a little bit of a sneak peek into what is actually my primary recommendation in the Scandinavian. And that is this line known as the Lashnika variation, where rather than playing the old main line with c6, where here Mamedyarov, in this game against Anand, played bishop to f5. And the idea of the Lashnika variation, which I do go into very deeply in the course, is that rather than playing the move of c6 and just running the queen away to safety, you play the move bishop b4 and you sort of recycle the bishop for the knight in order to get a fairly solid foothold in the center where you kind of get some pressure against the d4 pawn, and you make the point that their bishop's just not that active either here. Now, if white plays perfectly, they probably have a small advantage, but it's definitely a position with a lot of scope to play for a win. And that's the thing with this Scandinavian, like, no matter how you play the Scandinavian, if white plays correctly, they do get a small edge, but you have the advantage of having a lot more familiarity and knowledge of the positions, because we're playing a bit of a shortcut, whereas our opponent has probably not faced the Scandinavian all that often compared to, say, c5, e5, or even the French, let's say. Anyhow, in the game, Anand plays the move knight e5, which is actually a little bit my tip for white. But here, instead of the move bishop f4 in the game, white should really play the move bishop c4, and then go g4 if they want to fight for an advantage. Again, I cover this in a lot of detail in the course. But after bishop f4, black plays knight d7, just looking to challenge the knight. White moves the knight away, queen d8, and if white plays knight e3, they do probably have a small advantage. But again, it's quite a playable position, like g6. You don't have any weaknesses. It's a bit of an unusual structure. Again, some decent scope to play for a winner's black here. And also in correspondence, black's been doing a pretty good job of holding their own. Again, I go a lot deeper into this in the course. This is just the short version. But the move of d5 is one that Anand played, which I think Mamajarov was pretty happy to see, because after cd5, if white does take back, you just kind of go e5. There's just a really nice trick at black's disposal, where they can't even take that pawn, actually, because then after queen a5, you've got a little crossfire with the fork and the pin, where if they try to save the knight, well, then the other knight is lost, and that is going to be just an extra piece for black when the dust settles. So white ends up playing knight e3, so trying to course correct a bit. Now, admittedly, this game wasn't the most precise. Like a move like bishop e4 and going e5, might have been a little bit more of a reliable equalizer for black. But in the game, black played bishop e6, which is technically fine, but it's true that Mamedyarov maybe was a little bit too dynamic at some points of this game. I mean, his g5 was kind of a cool idea, realizing that, if bishop takes g5, that d4 does kind of discover that attack on the bishop and on the knights, and with bishop f6, you do have d3 as a very critical intermezzo to be up a piece when the dust settles. So that's kind of a fun idea, this g5 move. But after bishop g3, black probably should have just played some solid move, like either, d4 to, just give back the pawn in order to get your king castled, or a move such as a6, just kind of going into an endgame with, with chances for both sides. In the game, Amateur misplayed it, and I'm going to skip ahead a little bit from here, because I think that, black just didn't play this phase game all that well. But to be fair, it was also a rapid game, so that's one of the reasons why. But yeah, like if white plays a move such as knight cd5, then it does turn out that your king is running into a lot of problems here, which is obviously not so nice. But white ended up sort of taking with the wrong knight instead, and that kind of gave black a little bit of a reprieve, where even though it looks very scary, the black king is still staying alive. And in fact, it turns out to be the white king that is also coming under a little bit of fire at this point. So, a bit of a weird position when you kind of see the king, just being out in the open, but actually rather safe here. But yeah, in this rather chaotic position, white probably had to play to move c3. Like, it's still not great for white, but at least it kind of allows you to, meet queen a1 with queen b1 and, get into this endgame where, maybe you're pawn down after rook g2, but at least at least the game goes on, and the awkward position of our rook does, it does mean that white will have good compensation. But instead, white played the move rook he1, and this one's honestly a little bit of an easy puzzle. I set this one more for the less advanced students, because I do know that there are a lot of people, watching on YouTube who maybe rated below 1,000, so I want to kind of have something for them too. But yeah, you've probably figured out the answer by this point, that we are going to play the move of queen to a1, so that after king d2, the move rook d4 just takes the bishop with check, so I don't have time to take our queen, and, Anand did in fact resign his position. So there you have it. That's a game where, a former world champion, who was still was rated 2764 FIDE at the time of this game, by the way, but with a former world champion losing in just 24 moves. Like I said before, that's not really going to happen in the mainline opening. When you play a shortcut like the Scandinavian, and you get the opponent thinking on their own early on, well, that's when this magic can potentially happen. Next game I'm going to share with you is actually a game that I haven't. I'm pretty sure I haven't shown this one in my course actually. This one is a bit of a fresh one for you all. But it was played between Yu Yangyi against Mamajarov, so it's featuring Shakhriyar Mamajarov once again. Once again playing the move Queen A5 in the Global Chess League Rapid of 2023. But rather than the move of Knight F3 that we saw in the previous game by Anand, this time Yu Yangyi plays the move of Bishop to C4, which I think objectively is probably not quite as strong as Knight F3, but it can be a bit tricky if you're not ready for it. Because let's say, for example, if you play C6 and you just kind of play automatic moves without really thinking about it, White's got some quite tricky ideas like Knight D5, where they can sort of just get a really good attacking position, with something like Knight F3, and, just kind of just lining everything up for a very strong attack. And, structure is also admittedly not really the best here. So In order to avoid that, I recommend the move bishop g4 just as a nice way to, attack the queen and ask him some questions. The main move for white here is to play f3, and this is kind of a tabia position that can arise from a lot of different move orders, and is something that I actually have recently updated in my Play the Strongest Scandinavian course, where I had covered it already. But I do update it with some more recent games and some fresh ideas from 2025 to show you that black is in fact doing fine in this position. Like, you can even just develop the pieces, and there are different plans you can kind of go for, but again, I talk about it more in the course. After knight g2, I think in this position, I think in the course before, I was also talking about moves like knight c6 here and attacking this pawn. Because I really like this approach when you're just able to throw all the pieces at the d4 pawn. It's definitely something very much in a nice romantic style. But objectively speaking, I think e6 might actually be the most reliable move, which is also the move, by the way, that Mamedyarov played. White in turn played f3, because now it comes to the point where black is not able to tuck the bishop away, and if you are wondering, well, why is that important? Well, white does now have the option of playing g4 and going after the bishop, but it is worth pointing out that it's a lot less effective here than in this kind of version, because in this version, white can kind of use the extra tempo for the attack, like bishop d2, and instead of knight e2, which lets white off the hook, black off the hook, like white can play these moves like f4 and just kind of go for a really strong initiative on the king side, which is sort of the reason why I don't really recommend this for black in my course. But here, yeah, it's not as much of a problem because I already spent a move on knight g2, e2 here, meaning that this is just not going to be as scary. I mean, you can also play h5, but I do think knight f4 is going to be just a little bit of a nuisance. I mean, you can still let them take, and your position's still actually not that bad. Like, it's actually not as bad as it looks here in this case. But I still kind of prefer the move of h6, so just as something a little bit more solid, just to kind of have that hidey hole for the bishop with bishop h7. I'll just put a little exclamation mark for the benefit of those who have the PGN file within the actual course. And if white wants to fight for an edge, like maybe d5 is the move that white should explore. You can keep things close with e5 though, so it's honestly not that bad for black. You do have a foothold in the center after all. But yeah, in the game we had bishop d2. And against this, I probably would have played the move queen b4 and just going a bit greedy and tried to grab the pawn, or queen e2 knight c6 and hit him this way. But in the game, black goes queen b6, and white, in turn, kind of misses their chance to get in d5. Like, you always have to be careful of d5 in the Scandinavian, because that is the way in which they're going to be able to open their position and use their lead in development against you. But with this being a rapid game, Yu Yang Yi rated 2-7, 3-4 FIDE at the time of the game. He missed his opportunity, and now with d5 running in a knight d4, it's suddenly not so easy for white. And after the move bishop b5 in the game, a black castle long, and it's always nice when you can get that heavy pressure on d4. That's a way that I've been playing the Scandinavian in a lot of different versions recently, and it's really been working quite well for me. Now here's where the game gets really sharp. After queen d4, bishop takes c6. In this position, there's a few moves black can play. Obviously bc6 looks a little bit scary to have the queen in front of your king, even though the computer is just very cold-blooded and just says you can play queen e5 and still hold this position anyway, because computer just doesn't have any fear. But Mamedyarov instead goes bishop c2 and tries to get his little intermezzo and a bit of a counterattack, which does force white to play precisely. For the moment they are up to the task, and they do play bishop to b7, trying to get in a queen b5 check and a possible repetition like this. But king b8 is a nice move to keep the game going by Mamedyarov. Very nice example of, make their king go back, the knight go back, and then play king b7, so that we can meet queen b5 with queen b6 and avoid the perpetual. With that in mind, white plays bishop e3, but keep in mind that black is currently a pawn up. We are keeping the attack on the bishop here. And yeah, even though it looks kind of scary, there isn't actually such a clear way for white to get at the black king. Because if you do play knight b5, black can play to move bishop b4 and sort of safeguard their king that way. And keep in mind as well, the white king is not exactly entirely safe here either. But in the game after king f2, this one I want to share as a little bit of a puzzle. I do realize, yeah, that with this, the video might go a little bit longer, but, I'm happy to over-deliver for you all. But what do you think is the move that Mamedyarov played here in order to lay claim to a significant advantage? And for this one, if you do need to pause the video to think about some more, feel free to do so. There's also a good one to kind of put in the comments below just to see if you get it right, and to kind of get a little bit of discussion going about the position. But here, basically, if you play a quiet move, White's just going to play a move like knight b5 or queen c4 and just have a really strong attack on the king. So we do need to play quite dynamically here, and it turns out that g5 is a really great way to do that. Where if they were to play a move like knight g2, we can kind of go bishop d3 and just really curtail their whole initiative. Like at this point, we are a pawn up, we have the bishops, and our pieces are more active, so they just can't really get at our king, which actually ends up being reasonably safe in a case like this. That being said, hg5 also not so great. Like in the game, White kind of trying to turn the game around, and they tried to go for a counterattack on the king. But Black just very cold-bloodedly just played the move of gf4, because they realized that after takes, that we're not forced to, play king to gc7 and just have all the pieces coming into the attack. But we have a very valuable calculation technique known as the intermezzo. We can play the move bishop to d3 in this position, and only then, if they were to move the queen, say queen e1, then we can just liquidate all of their attackers, so that in a position like this, you just have like a million pieces for the queen, which is way too much. In the game, White sacrificed the queen in a sort of desperation, but at the end of the day, White's just a piece down, and White did in fact resign from this position. So a pretty crushing win, just 26 move win by Mamedyarov against Yu Yangyi. And with that, let's get into some of the other games as well. Our next game comes from a playoff match in Bhugovan 2017 between Wei Yi as White's grade 2-7-40 FIDE at the time against Vasily Ivanchuk. And Ivanchuk is one of these players, likes to just play creatively in the opening. Here we see him going for a bit more of an original approach, like delaying the move knight f6 and kind of going more for this sort of thing instead, just trying to play a bit more flexibly. Now, it is true that this approach here, I don't really sort of put c6 as my main recommendation. I mean, I do cover it briefly in my course as an alternative, but I do think bishop d2 is a very good reply. Like, it really helps to have that bishop g4 option available like we saw in the previous game. And also if you play like knight f6, even say bishop c4, like the attack on the queen just ends up being a little bit of a pain in this case. So here, if White does play the move g4, this does end up being a bit of a problem, where just by going after our bishop, they can just make our life really, really unpleasant. However, where you didn't notice at the time, and once you get this on the board, then suddenly the position, well, certainly after White plays queen f3, which is a little bit too creative, suddenly the position doesn't look so bad for Black anymore. And yeah, I mean, queen f3, just, yeah, really, like, it's really the knight that belongs on f3, not the queen here. But yeah, as it happened after Castle's knight f6, the threat of bishop g4 is a little bit of a nuisance, so White plays knight e2 to cover that. There's a lot of ways you can play it here as Black. Like, the computer kind of likes the move of rook c8, just kind of preparing ideas of b5 and trying to get counterplay on the queen side against their king. But the move in the game, queen c7, just getting out of the way of any discoveries, is going to be perfectly reasonable as well. So White goes h3, trying to get this moving along. Black plays h6, which I'm honestly not the biggest fan of. I think that, and it's something I also cover in a different type of position in the course. It's fresh in my mind because I just recorded this video just yesterday. But it turns out that h5 is kind of a nice idea to know, just for holding back g4. It's a little bit of a recent computer wrinkle, but it's one that kind of works well in a few of these different positions in my experience. There's also knight b6 you can also flick in, and you can also play it this way for some active piece play, just with the knight in the center and saying their bishop is a bit misplaced on b3. But yeah, once White misses a chance to go g4 and kind of get this attack going, which is something you do have to be careful of when you play the Scandinavian. You have to be careful of this kingside pawn storm in a few different positions, because it's a more dynamic way for White to play it and to put some pressure. But after White plays rook he1, now Black is going to be reasonably comfortable. G4 just doesn't have quite as much sting now. And after king b1, bishop d6, Yeah, instead of bishop b6, maybe knight b6 is again going to be a little more precise. But anyway, bishop d6 was played. We had g4, bishop h7. And yeah, this is the point where white kind of self-destructs. Where I think if white plays king, bishop b3, and just kind of slowly improves the position here, I do think that white is a little bit better, due to black not playing absolutely the most precise moves on the last 5 or so turns. Then again, it is like a blitz rapid game, so again, you can't expect perfection. And after the move knight f4, so at this point, the key move for black, and when you play these Scandinavian structures, you want to always keep your eyes open for a good opportunity to hit back in the center and get rid of their space advantage. Obviously, c5 doesn't really make sense when knight b5 is coming, but the move e5 does prove to be quite strong here with the double attack like this. I probably should play knight e2, as depressing as it is to admit your mistake, because in the game after d5 and knight e5, now white has got all kinds of tactical problems. So let me ask you this. What's the move that you would play as black in this position? I think this one shouldn't be too hard, but just to make sure that you're still paying attention, because I realize it's a little bit of a longer video. So the answer here is that we want to make sure all of the toys are in the party, that all of the football players are on the field. And by putting the rook opposite the queen, we are setting up all kinds of nasty discovered attacks. Well, I tried to cover one of them with bishop e3, but the problem now is that after knight takes c4, queen c4, and the move of b5, Wei Yi resigned here, because if he moves the queen away, we're just going to basically take the knight. And if they try to defend it, we move like queen d4, we just go c5, and we're just going to win the bishop, win the knight, and just win the game like this, basically. So yeah, that's essentially how Ivanchuk won in just 18 moves. I mean, I'm always in disbelief myself. Like, how does a player like Wei Yu lose in 18 moves? Well, when you play a surprise system like a Scandinavian and you know it really well, that's what made it possible for Ivanchuk to pull this off. Now, we do have a few more games left to cover. I mean, with where we're going, it'll probably be about an hour-long vid. But yeah, basically, the next game I'm going to share is actually one played between Naroditsky against one of the big Scandinavian experts on chess.com, Vietnamese Grandmaster Latone Min, known as Wonderful Time on chess.com. And actually, yeah, in this game, he played the way I played my first Scandinavian when I was first playing Scandinavian. I was playing this queen d8 and c6 just so I wouldn't have running into problems with my queen coming under fire being developed early in the game. But rather than his bishop f5 move, and I'll explain in a moment why I don't really recommend this, I was kind of playing it more of this move of b5, this kind of Moran style approach, which I do in fact cover in the course actually, how to play those kinds of positions. Obviously, it's not like objectively playable if white plays perfectly, but it's something that gave me good results as an 1800 player, and it's fairly easy at least to understand what black is trying to do for the first 15 or so moves. Plus, it does have a bit of a surprise value because it's kind of one of these forgotten systems from about, 20 to 30 years ago. Anyway, the move bishop f5 is the more obvious question, but if white does play the move of g4, again, this theme kind of coming into play that you got to be careful about the bishop. The threat of h5 is really hard to deal with because you really don't want to, allow the double g pawns. That's just not going to be playable. But after bishop b4, if white knows this move of f3, just kind of stopping the bishop e4 resource, then it's just a really, really bad position and, essentially just completely unplayable for black. However, in this game, when this one was a bit of a bullet game, so that's why the game wasn't the highest quality, but, Naroditsky played a slightly careless castles, and after knight d7, now black is just doing quite fine again. Like, this loses a lot of its sting when we can just, take the knight effectively. White played queen f3 in the game, but I do think queen e2 would have been a better move in the position to give the knight some proper support. Because after queen f3, the difference now, and this is a transformation I noticed comes up quite a lot in the Scandinavian middle games. I noticed it coming up a lot as I was, covering different model games for my Play the Strongest Scandinavian 2025 update. But the point is after takes that this transformation is just very nice for black, where the pawn on e5 does come a little bit under fire. If white does defend it with queen e2, then queen h4, and you're sort of even threatening to, a few little tricks against the bishop, or f4, we can kind of just bring the pieces to really active squares where you can almost argue that white has if anything, a little bit of a space disadvantage. They're actually a little bit overextended in this kind of position, which is a theme that does often come up with these sort of, more sideline kind of openings versus e4. Because you often see in openings like the Alukin as well, for instance. But with bishop f4, this is the other puzzle I wanted to share with you guys. Like this one, just kind of to test your skill in kind of taking this position that optically looks very good for white, which actually ends up being good for black. But why exactly is it good for black? Mm. So the answer here is that the move g5 is clutch, because the only move that keeps the bishop and the pawn alive is bishop g3. But now after h5, we're kind of using that bishop as a hook for the attack. When they make luft for the bishop with h3, we then have g4, and we use that hook to open up the lines against the white king. Meaning that if they play something like hg4, we just have this very ready-made attack, and there are a lot of good ways to play it. Like, even in the worst case, you can just take the pawn on c2 and be a pawn up. Okay, I guess I can play queen g4, but you still have a pretty good attack even then. If I had this in the game, maybe I'd actually play queen g5, though. Just kind of trying to line up a checkmate down the h file, which sounds very blunt and direct, but it is actually pretty effective here. But after queen e2, the rest of the game was just black basically just being up material, just continuing with the attack and converting it into a win. There are some improvements for both sides, which I do cover in the PGN notes, that students of Play Strong Scandinavian do get access to those notes as a bit of a bonus to the video. But yeah, at this point, once white kind of misses a chance to, at least kind of bail out to a pawn down ending, which is, not outright lost due to white's bishop pair. Once they miss that chance, it just becomes very one-way traffic. White does miss a little bit of a chance with the move bishop a6 to at least try to make it a bit messy, but after rook d3, it just kind of flows together for black, where black's just up material. White also kind of missed a little bit of a fork here as well, and white just basically resigned from this position because mate's coming anyway. Yeah, very nice win by Tun Minler. And just so show, even against a player who is like one of the, I would say, top 5 bullet chess players of all time in Naroditsky, how you can still potentially get a quick win just by, having a set system you play and just kind of punishing the mistakes they make without much time to think about it. And while some might say, yeah, it's just bullet, it's also worth keeping in mind that, that with bullet games, that these are also kind of very reflective of how your opponents, say, rated like 1800, 2000, 2100, how those sort of ranking opponents will be somewhat similar to how a top GM will play like in bullet. I mean, maybe that's even like, going a little too far, but you sort of get the idea. It's sort of more indicative of how your opponents might play compared to if I just showed you classical time control games. It's amazing how much you can actually learn from blitz games by strong players and seeing how they sort of connect with what your opponents will kind of play in even longer time controls. Now, this next game between Movsesian against Nakamura is actually a game that I do analyze in my course in quite a bit of detail. It's kind of a good example of how to play against Knight F3, which is a little bit of a tricky alternative that I find very few players below 2000 are really ready for because they don't have my course. But on a more, on a more serious note, what a lot of players do is they'll just kind of play it like it's a normal Scandinavian, like they'll play their system opening and they're not really going to think about it. But the problem though is that if white gets a position like this, and I got this sort of position a lot of times, by the way, with the white pieces about a bit over a decade ago. This is kind of one of my weapons against the Scandinavian in like 2010-ish. Well, white just gets a very strong initiative. Like they've got more space, their structure is way more flexible compared to the version that we saw in the previous games with a pawn on c2. So this one really is kind of an example of what to what to kind of avoid as black. This is what you don't want to allow. And so by playing bishop g4 first, you're making it that if they do play d4, which is in fact what Movsesian played in the game, and in this game Movsesian was rated 2-7, 2-3, so it's like pretty close to his peak. But then you get this very nice pressure, just everything focusing fire on the d4 pawn. And if you do want to try to play this in a lot of different versions, I do show you a few different ways in which you can get this attacking setup in the within the course, as it were. But yeah, with bishop e3 and e5, we are again just lining everything up. Where if they do play a move like d5, well then in that case you can take, and you have tricks like knight e5, using the pin on the knight to have a little bit of an initiative in this symmetrical position. But white in the game played the more critical c4, and again, I talk about it more deeply in the course, so I'm just gonna kind of show the moves that just lead to the more critical position. Like I'm not going to talk so much about the improvements because again, it's covered in the course, but I will at least show you, a little bit of how the position plays out just to give you a bit of a feel for it. At this point here, white played rook d1. I'd say that maybe moves such as long castling or rook c1 might have given more chances for an advantage for white. Though even then, I still think black's doing okay. But after rook d1, black found quite a nice move in c6, just really putting some pressure in the center before white fully consolidates. If they play a move like d6, we have c5 to try to round up the pawn. But if they play dc6, you just get this pretty comfortable position where even though your king is a little bit open, the fact that king can't castle kind of makes it okay for you. And your endgame will just end up being most likely equal at the end of the day. But instead, Movsesian tried to be a bit more creative and played it this way with takes bishop e5 and sort of trying to play it a bit more dynamically in a sense, saying that if black plays a move like dc4 that the black king ends up being a little bit open in a case like this. But it turns out we can improve on the move d takes c4, and that's kind of our puzzle here. What would be the move that you would play as black? What do you think is a move that Nakamura played in this position with black to move? And again, if you need more time to think about it, just pause the vid. So the answer here is that this backward move of knight d7, and that's been a little bit of a theme actually for this video, like being able to notice those backward moves, which are a common blind spot. You can kind of see how, we're not just improving your opening skills, but actually make you a much better chess player through this style of, the presentation. But we're just kind of using your openings as a tool, kind of like how you put vegetables in tomato sauce so your kids eat it. Some openings are kind of like the sauce to get you to improve your chess and get excited about it. But knight d7 does pin the bishop, and after rook d5, f6, the bishop is simply lost. And just to kind of show you the final moves of how black won, he just did a good job at just keeping the control over the position, not letting the e-pawn start running down the board or playing white get an attack on the black king here. So queen f2, I mean, you could also play queen b6 if you just want to trade the queens and just win the endgame. But, a6 is also fine here. Alright, rook e8, knight e5, and, in the game, white missed this knight f3 trick to win the exchange. But white was already kind of lost anyway, so white did just resign in this position. This game being just 28 moves. And I believe this next game might be the last one. Let me just see. Yeah, this next one is actually the last game, but it features a bit of a funny move order actually, where in this position, so in the actual game, like basically white made a bad pre-move where they kind of end up accidentally playing the Tennyson Gambit in this game between Farusha against Giri. And yeah, this one is a bit of a bullet game, but just kind of like a fun, light-hearted game just to conclude and, a bit of a reward for you for, really paying attention and really getting the full value out of the training. But, when you play like bullet chess, for example, on online or Blitz, there'll never be some people who are just not paying attention and just pre-move their move and, forget that you can just take their pawn in a sense. So we take the pawn. Giri played the move of bishop to f5 here, just defending the pawn like that. And also kind of neutralizing d3 a little bit. So bishop c4, e6, and here Giri kind of realizing the position was very, very bad, so I've tried to, go into swindle mode, play queen f3, like trying to attack here. But Giri just played the move knight c6 just to cover the b7 pawn. And here I play this move at knight f7, and I feel like this position just makes a really good calculation puzzle to see if you can kind of figure out what's going on here, because there's a bit of a weird position with the piece just seemingly sprawled all across the board. But can you find a better move than Giri in this position? What would be the move that you would play as black? And this was also a bullet game, so I realize I'm giving you a little bit more time to think about it. Okay, so in the game, Giri played the move of knight d4, which, even though it's not objectively the best move, is still a pretty decent solution, practically speaking. Because if knight d8, we go knight f3, and you just end up with this endgame where even though the material's equal for the moment, like black's clearly way ahead in development. And we also can even just kind of bring our pieces around to sort of attack the pawn and end up probably winning d3. So that's just going to end up being very, very nice for black. In the actual game, I kind of blundered a little bit with queen f5 and just end up in a position where, white was just losing the rook. And I'm not going to show like every move of the game because like at this point, like black was just a rook up and, white would have resigned except for the fact there was a bullet game. But yeah, black ended up winning in a few more moves from here. Okay, because it's not many more moves, I will just show it to the end, but it's nothing too convoluted, as you can see. Just simple chess, trade the pieces, take their pawns, win the end game. But it turns out there's actually even a better move of queen d4 as well, where you can sort of attack their bishop, and you're sort of making the point that if they take, that their knight just ends up being completely trapped here. And once you kind of get some more pieces out, like you can even just basically win that knight when you please. Or you can also just play moves like knight d4 and just kind of crush their king in the center, depending on what they do. But that's sort of the idea that does give black a completely crushing position. And if they do play cd3, you can kind of go bishop b4 and bishop g4 is a nice little intermezzo, just getting out of the way of like king f7, queen f5, which is a trick I probably should have explained a little bit earlier. But yeah, basically in this case you do end up just winning a piece and just winning the game as it turns out. So yeah, that's basically the 10 most crushing Scandinavian wins I want to share with you. Do let me know in the comments below which of these games was your personal favorite to see. Guess that way I also know which ones kind of cover in future videos on the Scandinavian. But yeah, I hope you could feel like my love of the Scandinavian, my passion for the opening. And it's not just me just like getting excited for the sake of it, but it is objectively an opening that does make White's life a little bit tricky and a bit difficult, because otherwise, you wouldn't have 10 plus games of two 700 plus GMs losing in less than 30 moves as such. But yeah, with that being said, I know I mentioned a few times before, but if this, long form video has inspired you to, play the Scandinavian yourself in some games, that's really great. And if you do want to kind of take it to the next level, like if you enjoy this kind of style of training and you want to experience it, in a much greater scale, just to be able to not just like feel good about the opening, but to, be really confident in the positions and to, really understand exactly what's going on so you can play really well in the typical middle games and end games, as well as the opening, and just have that bit of a deeper kind of knowledge to make you a much better chess player and never have to fear e4 again. Then yeah, do check out that link in the description where I do, share like the details of my labor of love to play the strongest Scandinavian 2025. It was the very first opening course I created, and even today it's still kind of my favorite one actually with the updates. Like I've just had such great results playing on League Chess with the Scandinavian. Like I've beaten a lot of quite strong players there, even a player who was like the highest rated blitz player on all of League Chess. Actually beat him with the black pieces using the Scandinavian. And he hated so much against switch of playing d4 against me after that. So, that in itself was a bit of a win. But anyway, yeah, that's all from me. I will see you in the next training video. And yeah, until then, take care.